It should have been an uneventful evening. I was temporarily assigned to the Navy Communications Station, the ComStay, at Rota, Spain. Call sign AOK. I was pulling the eve shift at an operator's position, but had nothing to do. I wasn't a radioman, the job title, a Navy rate. I was a CT, a communications technician. My temporary assignment was to the communications station Rota. At the end of a year in Iceland, I got orders for southern Spain to a naval security group high-frequency direction finding site. But it was still being built. There were several things I could do that night. I could study for another stripe, I could sketch, I could tune the shortwave bands and listen to music from England or France or the news from the Voice of America. The receiver was top-notch, only the best when Uncle Sam paid the bill. The transmitter was even better. It was bigger and located at Morón Air Force Base, 50 kilometers southeast of Sevilla. The Morris key at the position I sat at was tied to a transmitter at Morón. Just touching the key would send a 50,000 watt dit around the world on some frequency. That's when I noticed a frequency placard by the key. It said 17.682 megahertz. That sounded familiar. In Iceland, one of the frequencies I listened to Russian shipping on was 17.683 megahertz. That close in frequency meant anyone listening on one frequency could hear a transmission on the other. I thought no more about it. Bored, later I tuned the receiver to the Odessa port control. It was time for the weather messages. Odessa Pagoda, Odessa weather. The weather the ships were experiencing out of the Atlantic. Before satellites, this is how much of the weather data was gathered. The Russian transmitter in Odessa was powerful. It could be heard anywhere in the Atlantic and far beyond. There were hundreds of Soviet bloc ships in the Atlantic. The ships Odessa talked to were mostly going to and from Cuba. The U.S. was doing its best at the time to crash the Cuban economy. Sugarcane was Cuba's primary export, and the Soviet Union and its bloc were buying huge quantities of it. Sweet. So every 6 hours, the station at Odessa, Ukraine, had 2 or 3 dozen merchant ships waiting to send weather messages. These were short blocks of numbers in groups of 5. The first 2 number groups contained their position in longitude and latitude. Handy for seeing how accurate our bearing was. These were merchant ships. They weren't trying to hide. Their radio operators were veterans of decades at sea. They were the best Morse code ops in the world. They stayed with the old radio telegraph when other merchant ships had converted to teletype. The call signs were 4 letters starting with U. Port stations had 3 letters. Odessa UFB had a list of call signs. They'd receive weather messages in that order. No ship's operator wanted to get pushed to the back of the list by failing to answer promptly. They all wanted to get finished so they could go to the mess or join a card game. At 6 sharp, UFB called the first on the list. He started sending, fast, 40 words a minute. These guys, and sometimes gals, didn't waste time. They didn't make mistakes. But if there was a static or propagation was wonky, Odessa might miss a number. When it did, it just sent a dit. On hearing that, the ship would go back and send the previous number again. Remembering this, the devil whispered in my ear. When the op on the ship was hitting his stride, I tapped the key. The ship heard it and repeated a number group. When he got his rhythm back and was sending at speed, I tapped the key again. I've done that a couple of times when the ship's operator just stopped. UFB told him to keep going. It's only some ass at AOK. I bet this had happened before, but the radioman that normally sat at that position didn't know Russian shipping was using the frequency next door. He would not have known their procedure. This bit of mischief would not have gotten me in trouble, just a don't do it again warning. However, around that same time, another CT, this one at the Panama Canal direction finding station, a few seconds before 6, he called for traffic from the ships. When the guys at the DF station, Panama, noticed that somehow UFB was extremely strong and right on top of them, distorting their scopes, they figured it out. Somebody called the communications station. The spoof stopped right then, and the real UFB took over. I doubt anything happened to anyone but the errant sailor, a fellow CT.